right, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for effective engagement with your Board of Education. Tonight is presented in partnership with the Connecticut Parent Advocacy Center, or CPAC, and the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education, CABE. I'm Jen Lussier, and I'm the Partnership Programs Manager of CPAC, and I'm joined by Patrice McCarthy, who is the Executive Director and General Counsel for CABE. Tonight's webinar is part of CPAC's work with Connecticut Statewide Family Engagement Center called Connecticut Family School Partnerships. And this presentation is for informational purposes and should not be considered legal advice. For those of you who are not familiar with CPAC, we are Connecticut's Parent Training Information Center funded under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. We are a statewide nonprofit organization that offers free training, information, and support related to special education. And at CPAC, it's our mission to support, educate, and empower families of children with disabilities and chronic conditions ages birth to 26. And I'll turn it over to Patrice to tell us a little bit about CABE.
Thank you so much, Jen, and good evening, everyone. The Connecticut Association of Boards of Education is a nonprofit membership organization that represents local and regional boards of education throughout Connecticut. We've existed for 120 years, and we provide education, advocacy, and support to school board members. In Connecticut, there are 1,400 volunteer school board members who provide governance for our public schools.
And so before we dive into tonight's content, I always like to ground us in Connecticut's definition of family engagement. And you have to click again here, Jovi. So Connecticut has a statewide definition, and its family engagement is full, equal, and equitable partnership among families, educators, and community partners to promote children's learning and development from birth through college and career. And we know that when families and schools work together, research tells us that it improves outcomes for all students. All right, I'll turn over to you.
Let's talk about where education authority comes from. In Connecticut, education is a right that is protected by our Constitution. And our legislature has delegated the responsibility for fulfilling that obligation to our local and regional boards of education. Now, many state statutes set overall expectations and parameters for our schools, and then local boards of education carry out those responsibilities in their communities. Next slide, please. What our state law says is that every child has an equal opportunity to have a meaningful public education. It also provides that there be adequate funding for schools. And in Connecticut, our schools are funded to a very small extent with federal resources and to a large extent by state and local resources. And that varies from community to community. So in many communities, it is primarily the local taxes that support public schools with a small contribution from the state. And in other communities, there is a larger level of state support. Boards of education and their superintendent, who serves as the chief executive official of the school district, are responsible to make sure that all of the education laws that are prescribed are implemented in every school district for every child. Next slide, please. So the Board of Education in your community governs the schools, and they do that by setting local policies on a whole variety of topics: attendance, homework, discipline, school climate. They are also responsible for taking care of the buildings in the district, keeping them safe, providing for indoor air quality, and they're also responsible for transportation. In some states, transportation is not considered a right of public education, but in Connecticut, it is. So there are local policies that govern the distance from school that a child would be eligible for transportation, and a shorter distance than that, they would be walking to school if there are safe sidewalks, for example. And the Board of Education has to make sure that every child in the district who wants to attend public school is able to do so. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what boards are responsible for and what they're not responsible for. So a Board of Education is a governing body. They don't provide instruction. They don't supervise classroom teachers, but they do develop the district policies and make sure that those are consistent with what the state laws require. The one person that the Board of Education hires is the superintendent. And that is also the one person in the district that the Board of Education evaluates. The board and the superintendent work as a leadership team, and they make sure that the policies are relevant and that they are implemented in accordance with the direction that the Board of Education has provided. A very important job of every Board of Education is to develop and adopt the annual budget. And that's a very significant policy statement because no district has unlimited resources. So the Board of Education has to prioritize among the various needs what they are able to provide. Next slide, please. In many cases, our state legislature, which actually happens to be meeting this evening, establishes requirements that boards of education have to adopt policies. Some of their legislative requirements are very specific, and some leave a significant amount of discretion to local boards of education. Among the areas where our legislature is requiring policies are graduation requirements. In that case, the state has set a minimum level of graduation requirements, but a local board of education could exceed those requirements. You have to have policies on student discipline, on attendance and homework. The homework story was interesting because there was a legislator a number of years ago that wanted to put in very specific requirements that there could be no more than, for example, 20 minutes of homework in grades 1 through 3. And then the amount of time on homework went up from that. Rather than do that, we encourage the legislature to say, if this is an important issue, then require that each board of education develop their own policy about homework. That policy could be very broad, such as every classroom teacher is responsible for determining the appropriate amount of homework, or it could be more specific and provide some parameters about the amount of time. Other policies include a process for reporting bus complaints, a process for choosing and approving textbooks, and most recently, a policy about the selection of library materials and ensuring that there's a process for review of those materials on a periodic basis. Next slide, please. Each year, boards of education, often during a board retreat, set the goals for the district. And this is the roadmap that is then reflected in the priorities that they set in their budget. So there's a statement of educational goals, and by statute, that has to be reviewed every 5 years. That's important so that as there is turnover on our boards of education, we've just had a local election, so there are new members joining our boards of education. By reviewing those goals, that makes sure that the current board embraces them and reflects them in the decisions that they make. And it's important that those goals reflect the priorities of the community and the needs of the students in that school district. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about school budgets and where the resources come from. The administration prepares a draft budget and brings it to the Board of Education, and that's done on an annual basis. The board and the administration then work with the town or city's Board of Finance or whatever the fiscal body is in your community. The Board of Education in Connecticut does not have independent taxing authority. So they are dependent on the appropriation, the grant of funds that comes from the municipality. Often that determination is not enough to meet all of the priorities that the Board of Education has established. So the Board of Education then has to go back and look at the budget and make adjustments so that they operate under a budget that is within whatever the total appropriation is from the municipality. Sometimes that means that they need to transfer money between various budget lines. As the school year progresses, they see needs are greater in one area than they had projected. And also, unfortunately, sometimes boards of education have to freeze certain accounts so that they may maintain their budget within whatever the total appropriation is. In your districts, you may have heard from time to time that supplies are being frozen or school field trips are being paused. And that's because the board has a legal responsibility not to overexpend whatever dollar amount the municipality has appropriated. And if they did so knowingly, they could be personally liable for that overexpenditure. Next slide, please. So what comprises the school district budget? In most of our school districts, personnel is the largest portion of the district budget. And that makes sense. It's teachers, paraprofessionals, administrators, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, all of those individuals that are key to supporting your child's education. So that's where the bulk of the money goes. There also has to be resources for maintenance of buildings, materials, other programs that the board wants to introduce in order to support students. Next slide, please. So how can you understand more about your school district's budget and have an impact on that budget? Well, it begins by attending your Board of Education budget forums. Every Board of Education in Connecticut provides the opportunity, usually over the course of several meetings, public meetings, where they go through the various sections of the budget, and it's done for the benefit of the board, but it's also an opportunity for the community to learn what is in the budget and what the board's priorities are. So that's an educational opportunity where you can see, you may wonder, well, how could transportation possibly cost so much? Well, in those forums, there'll be an explanation of the transportation line item and what the percentage increase is to cover that cost. Next slide. So why is the budget so important? Well, we've talked about that it prioritizes the programs and services that the Board of Education can make available. It also reflects the goals that the Board of Education has agreed upon. And when a board is looking at their budget, they're both trying to look at the immediate needs as well as the long-term needs. Now, long-term, both in terms of their students, preparing students for life after they leave the public school system, but also long-term needs of things like the school facilities. So dedicating funds to maintenance of buildings, to repair and replacement of heating and cooling systems, those all go to the long-term support that will be there for the next decade of students. Next slide, please. So we talked about a Board of Education's legal responsibility to live within the total appropriation and prioritizing how those funds are expended. And we also talked about sometimes needing to move money between accounts so that student needs are best met and so that unanticipated expenditures can be covered. Jen, do you want to talk about the funding webinar?
Yes, thank you so much. And I'm actually going to post the links in the chat for anybody who wants to learn a little bit more about school budgets. We did a webinar with the Connecticut State School Finance Project last year called Navigating School Budgets, and it is on our YouTube channel, and it is available in English and Spanish. And I've also posted the links to those webinars in the chat, because we know that we could spend an entire session just on budgets alone. Thank you. And you can go. Are you all set with this slide,
I
Patrice?
am.
Thank
Back
you.
to you.
All right. So thank you so much, Patrice, for sharing with us the roles of boards of education and some of the functions that they do. When families and community members understand how the Board of Education works, they can share more meaningful input on policies that affect their children. It helps families be able to ask questions confidently and attend meetings, knowing how to participate. It helps you feel prepared and ensure that your voice is heard. Through ongoing communication, families can build stronger partnerships with decision makers. When families and school leaders work together, it strengthens trust and leads to better outcomes for students. Ultimately, this kind of engagement helps make schools better for all students. Every time a family participates with purpose, it contributes to a stronger and more inclusive school community. Next slide, Jovi. Thank you. Um, so there are many different ways that you can engage. Not, I know every family has different ways of participating. And I always tell my parent leaders, knowledge is power. It's really important to try to stay informed about what's going on at the local school district level, the state level, and national levels, if you can. And you can do this in different ways. Attending your Board of Education meetings is always a good way to stay informed, and most districts are showing live streams of the video or recordings of the meeting. So if you can't attend in person, you can typically attend virtually or watch the meeting later. Also learn about your district policies. If you don't know where they are, you can ask somebody in your school district. Typically, they're housed on the website where everybody can see. You can also explore Connecticut's EdSite data portal. And this is a data portal that you can find district level and even school level and state level data for a lot of things related to education, both general and special education, including issues like chronic absenteeism. You can serve on a district group, such as a parent advisory group or your school climate committee. And there are lots of different opportunities at each school building level or throughout the entire district where you can make some systemic changes. And thank you for posting the links to EdSite and the State Finance Project. And when staying informed, I always want to emphasize using accurate and trustworthy sources to stay informed. And we'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. Um, right now, we live in a day and age where you can get so much information at like the tip of your fingers, and um, it's not always accurate, objective information. So I wanted to share some examples where you can find information that you know is you can depend on to be high quality vetted resources, including the Connecticut State Department of Education's website, CPAC's website. I have listed CABE. Um, Patrice, did you want to share what some of the things they might be able to find on the CABE website are?
Sure. We have information for people that are considering running for their Board of Education, and I know that's something that some parents uh, look at as a possibility to have a greater impact in their community. We also archive all of the webinars that we offer. So we have webinars on school finance, on roles and responsibilities of boards of education, on communicating with civility, and a host of other topics.
Thank you, Patrice. And we also listed on here the Connecticut State and School Finance Project, and then some other research-based organizations, National Center for Pyramid Model and Innovations and understood.org for some disability-specific information. But those are just some examples of vetted resources that you can use to get your information to be informed.
So boards of education lead by example because they know that their community, parents, students, teachers are watching them because all of their meetings are conducted in public. So we have done some specific training to help boards of education deal with what can become contentious situations, particularly in the past several years after COVID, as schools reopened and health officials were providing guidance that districts followed. Not everyone in every community bought into that guidance. And that resulted in some very tense situations at Board of Education meetings. We know that because parents care deeply about their children, this is a passionate issue for them. And so we help boards of education understand how to interact respectfully, how to listen carefully, to allow different viewpoints to be expressed, and to try and model the healthy culture and climate at the board table that we also want to see in our schools. Next slide, please. Back to you, Jen.
Thank you. So there are many different ways that families can share their voice with the Board of Education. One way is by providing input as an individual. Any family member can attend board meetings, speak during public comment, or reach out to board members with questions or concerns. Sharing your perspective helps the board understand how policies and decisions affect students and families in real life. Another way is by providing input as part of a group, such as a Special Education Advisory Council or a SEAC. Advisory groups bring together parents, staff, and community members to discuss what's working well, where improvements are needed. And when the group makes recommendations, it reflects on the voices of many families, not just one, which can make a stronger impact. So, whether you participate on your own or through a group, your insights help guide decisions that support students across the district. So it's not I didn't know this before we worked on this, Patrice, until she told me, but it's not a requirement for by law that boards of education include a public comment, although most of them do. So during public comment, it's a time for community members to be able to come and share their input with the board. And it's important to know that the board, this is a time where the board listens, but they don't respond or discuss the comments at this point in the meeting. It's typical that speakers have 3 minutes to share their comments, but boards of education can set their own guidelines for public comment. So if you're thinking about participating, it's a good idea in preparation to learn what your the process is in your district. And feel free to chime in, Patrice, if I miss anything on that.
No, that's great.
Right. So here are just a few tips for meaningful public comment and making the most of your 3 minutes that you're up there. I can't, practice, practice, practice. Write down the points that you want to share, and make sure that you are able to fit your time within the allotted, to fit your comments in the allotted time. Being brief, respectful, speaking calmly and courteously, even when you disagree. Share thoughtfully. What you share becomes part of the public record. So, especially if you're trying to share about an experience that your child may have had. Um, if you don't want it to become part of the public record, you shouldn't say it at this meeting. And it's good to talk about a general situation, and not specific people, just again, naming specific staff, specific students, is not how we should be doing it. We should just be talking about it in a general, sense. If you're at the district level, I think when you're talking with the district staff, like your building administrators, your superintendent, then you could speak, in a different capacity, where if you had to bring other people's names into it, um, and offer solutions whenever possible. So if you're bringing issues, suggesting a constructive idea or next step is always helpful. And some people also like to follow up with an email to the board after the meeting for the record. Right. So sometimes it's not what we say, but how we say it. And there are things that can get in the way of the message that we're trying to convey. And, as Patrice mentioned earlier, we know parents care very deeply about their children. So emotion, it's natural to feel those feelings, but we don't want how we express those emotions to overshadow the message that we're trying to convey. Um, Another common pitfall, trying to cover too much, can also be overwhelming and and it can lead to people not hearing the point of what you're trying to say. Um, Making it again personal, too personal, and not about the situation, going over your time limit, and not being able to finish because you didn't prepare ahead of time. And it can also be frustrating if you're expecting the board to provide a response to you at the meeting, and sometimes it might not be the board that responds to you. It might be again more appropriate for the principal to reach out to you or the director of special education. But did you want to add anything to any common things that you see, Patrice?
Well, I just point out that the reason the board doesn't respond during public comment, and it's hard for board members to sit there and not respond, it's because individual board members have no authority. They only have authority when they act as a group. So if you come with an issue or concern that the administration may or may not be aware of, may or may not be prepared to provide input to the board at that moment, then the board is not in a position to act collectively. So you want your Board of Education to make decisions with the full amount of information that they need to make a good decision for the students in your district. So that's why they can't just say, oh, sure, that bus stop is unsafe. I've driven by there myself. We'll get that changed, because they don't have all the information.
Thank you, Patrice. That's helpful. All right, so how advisory boards work with the Board of Education. Um, so just, again, going back to the distinction that Patrice made, the Board of Education is a governing board. So they're the board that is responsible for the decision making, where advisory boards are providing feedback and input and really trying to influence and inform the people who are making those decisions. So talking about what's working well and what could be improved in the schools. And again, just being able to bring all the different voices and perspectives to provide those advisory opinions to the Board of Education. And your Board of Education will consider all of this input along with the laws, the budget, and the district goals, as Patrice had mentioned. And again, they make the final decision with input from the superintendent. And so, creating actual recommendations as an advisory board for CPAC supports special education advisory councils being developed in your local school districts. And one of the things that they typically do is provide an annual report with written recommendations to the Board of Education. And some of the tips for creating actionable recommendations, focusing on things that the board can actually control, sharing your ideas about programs, policies, and supports, not individual situations, keeping recommendations broad enough to help many students and families rather than just one child, being clear and specific, explaining why the issue matters, and offer one or two steps that the board could take to improve it. So show collaboration. So highlight any time where the advisory board and school staff agree or have worked together. And for our special education advisory councils, they include district staff, so that's something that is typically done fairly easily. But and connect to the district goals whenever possible. So link your ideas to the district's mission, priorities, or special education plans, and help the board see how your recommendations fit into their big picture. And again, I'll ask Patrice if she wants to add anything.
No, I think you've covered that, Jen.
All right. Um, so a strong recommendation focuses on solutions, not just frustrations, and gives the board something specific, realistic, and student-centered to act on.
And I would just add to that that not all recommendations, no matter how strong and well received they are, can be acted on immediately. So if it's a recommendation that requires funding and it's not included in the current budget, it might have to wait to be considered in the next budget development process. And I know that can be frustrating. We all want, when we've got good ideas, we want action on them sooner rather than later. But there are some things that do have to go through a process in order to be accomplished.
Thank you. And I think that that's something too to be said about advisory work, because sometimes it's planting a seed, and you might not be able to get to see that seed really grow to fruition right away. Thank you for sharing that. Ooh, and before we take any questions, I just wanted to share the QR code for a brief evaluation survey. So if any feedback that you give us, we really appreciate, and we want to be able to improve this for you. Um, and I think our contact information is on the next page if you have any questions for us. But if you have any questions and you want to raise your hand or type something in the chat, then we'll be happy to take a few questions.